Welcome back to Let's Make a Game. In this video, I would like to continue talking about inventory systems. In particular, explaining the example code that I've uploaded to itch.io, which has an inventory system that allows you to keep track of dropped items. In other words, you can drop an item in a particular location, leave that location, come back later, and the item will still be there. Specifically today, I'm going to talk about the system for moving around. What it does is it tells you where the player character is, and it prints buttons related to moving in particular directions. So let's look at the code. The relevant variables that we need, $direction, which are just the names of the directions that we're using, north, east, south, west. We could use 8 directions instead of 4 or even some different number, but it's probably most common to use 4. We need $location, which is the player character's current location, and we need $place, which is two different things. It's a description of every location in the game, and it's also the connections between the locations, which are stored here. So 2000 means that going north from that direction takes you to location 2, and going east, south, or west isn't possible. 0 means there's no way of going that way in the game. Now, I will say this doesn't look very good. It's very complicated looking, and a modern game wouldn't look like this. More specifically, instead of a list of items, you'd probably have little icons. So you'd have a picture, and then the player would hover over that, hover their mouse over that, and some text would come up that says a necklace of seashells, weight 1, something like that, and you'd click on the picture to drop it. But that's a cosmetic change, and we will look at how to do that later in the series. For now, we're just trying to get the system to work. So first of all, we tell the player where the player character is. You are, for example, on the south end of the beach, something like that. Then we print the buttons that will move the player character. We set Y to 0. That's a temporary variable that's purely for layout purposes. We have a for loop that goes from 1 to 4. If we were using 8 directions, it would go from 1 to 8. I could have used, instead of the number 4, I could have and probably should have used $direction.length -1, but I don't really intend to change the number of directions, so I guess I didn't think of it, that's why. And then we look in $place and we say, well, is there a number greater than 0 in the specific direction that we're looking at? If there is, we want to print a button. First of all, if Y is equal to 0, we set Y to 1 and we print a couple of line breaks. That's the purpose of this temporary variable up here. It just means that all of the direction buttons will be on their own line. If we printed this double line break and there wasn't any direction buttons, it would look a bit weird. It would look like there was a gap, so that's why we do that. If there are always going to be exits, well, we could just print break, break, but I was thinking of the possibility that we wouldn't, I guess. So we then use $Y again because its only purpose is this double line break. So we could have used X instead, but we might as well use Y. What we're doing is we're writing a bit of code, but we're putting it into this temporary variable, and then we're printing the temporary variable rather than having the code directly in the program. And the reason for that is because these things that we put in here wouldn't work properly. So what's Y going to have? Well, it's going to have a button, it's going to have the name of the direction, and it's going to send the player to details, in other words, back to this page. We have a slash button, which we always need when we have the beginning of a button command, And inside the button, we have some code. Because what's the point of sending the player to the page that they're already on unless we're going to make some sort of change? Well, the change we're going to make is set location equals whatever we found in that place array. So set location equals 2, for example. Then we print all that, and it will print a button. If we had this directly in the code, it wouldn't have worked. So we could have had something like, instead of putting all this into Y and then printing it, why don't we just have that? Wouldn't that be less complicated? Well, yes, it would, but it wouldn't work. Because this thing's going to go from 1 to 4. So Z is always going to have a value of 5 at the end of this. And so once you click this button, if we just put it straight into the program, when you press this button, the computer would say, what's $place, $location, Z? Well, Z is 5, so that's where I need to look. But of course, we don't want it to look in the current location of Z. We want it to look in the location of Z when we're going through the loop, if that makes sense. So that is why we do it this way, with writing it into a temporary variable and then printing the temporary variable. There is another way of doing it, but I prefer this way. It's just easier to see what's going on. Anyway, that is the system for moving around. In the next video, I'll talk about the systems for dropping the items, keeping track of the items, and picking up items when there are items to pick up. But I will leave it there for now. I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.